3, 2.
I got everybody pregnant with Barry Katz and semen.
I'm not comfortable with the tone this is taking.
If you're undeniable, you will not be denied.
If you want to be successful in show business, you get yourself a Jew white manager like Barry Katz.
Being a manager is just turning no's into yeses.
Creating holy shit moments.
Undeniable.
You fucking firing me up, Katz.
I love this man.
Is there anything else I should know?
You're on. What? Now I'm on the air.
Barry Katz.
Back in the house.
Let's do this.
All right. Very, very excited today. Great show. I've been looking forward to this show for a long time with a guy who I know for many years and has meant a lot to a lot of comedians out there, meant a lot to a lot of people who watch and listen to comedy, and certainly is a huge part of my career in many indirect and direct ways, which is Marc Maron. And I want to say something about Marc to the audience that a lot of you don't know. I started at a comedy club in Boston called Play It Again Sam's, which for those of you who don't remember me talking about it, it was a very unique comedy club, if you could call it that, in the Allston, Brighton, Brookline, Tri-City area of Boston, between Boston College and Boston University. And its claim to fame about this very interesting club is the upstairs had a small bar with a guy who wore turquoise rings. You know, when somebody's wearing turquoise rings and is a guitar player, you know he's living in some kind of dimension that you're not a part of. And he would always play in this tucked-in corner underneath this television that was like literally the stage where he performed was the size of half of a Ritz cracker. And he would be stuffed in there and he would entertain this bar area. And the next area was this like restaurant that was very low budget, like a restaurant out of IKEA from the 70s or something like that. But it was always packed. And then right next to that was the most original room in the place, which was a movie bar, which featured movies that, like right now, that you would see on Netflix or on DVD coming out or whatever. This is before all of that came out, before VHS, when you never could see a movie when it left the theater. And the only place you could see it was at this place, Play It Again Sam's. And he appealed to the college kids, and he would have 3 features. So, you know, and sometimes this is why I knew I wanted to be at this place. He would have like Richard Pryor Film Festival. So in other words, there'd be 3 Richard Pryor films, and it would be on real film.
And you could drink in there. That was the big attraction.
Yeah, and you could drink in there, and there were couches and everything, and it was really special. And it was a unique situation. And downstairs was the comedy club, which I ran from 1980 to 1988. And it was an odd situation because the owner of this place, Tom Maloney, who was he's passed away since, the guy had pictures of war all over the place. There were like pictures of every kind of bomb and military action or whatever. He was just this really type AAA person that you could never imagine anybody so much. And he was just this really angry guy, but he never got mad at me, never yelled at me, but he was the kind of guy, this is before human resources, the kind of guy that would like literally walk in the kitchen and like punch one of his employees and say, "You fucker, I told you to make the onion rings this way." And then just walk back out, and they would take it and keep going. But he never got mad at me. And he would always be in a situation when I took over the comedy club. This is what happened. He just gave it to me. I was like in college, and he gave me the comedy club to do, and he just said, "You do it. You take the door, you pay the comedians, and I'll take the bar and the food. You don't have to pay rent. You don't have to do anything. Just make it work." And I said to him, because back then I probably wasn't as good a businessman as I am now, and Marc would probably say I'm still not a good businessman, but the point being is that I said, "Why are you doing this? Why don't you just pay me a salary and pay the comedian? I'm like 19 years old or whatever. You could do this all yourself." And he said something fascinating. He said, "Barry, listen, I like movies. I like the movie bar. I don't like comedians." I said, "Why don't you like comedians?" He said, "Barry, I'll tell you why. Because movies are great to me. There's 3 reasons why I like movies better than comedians. I said, what's that? He said, movies, they don't show up late. They never talk back to me. And they never ask me for a raise. I said, okay, Tom. So I took it over and I started putting these shows together where I had, Bobcat Goldthwait hosting Wednesday, Dennis Leary hosting Thursday. Dana Gould was there as well, hosting some Fridays along with this Boston comedian, DJ Hazard. I had Lenny Clark on Saturdays. I paid $1,000 in 1980 to have Lenny Clark there on a Saturday because he was a huge draw, and I thought if I paid extra money, whatever, and I tried to treat the comics well. On Sunday, I had Anthony Clark from Yes Dear and a bunch of shows, and Jonathan Katz performed there, and Paula Poundstone. And the first time I met Marc Maron, he came down to do, I believe, an open mic night. I believe it was either, it could have been a Dennis Leary show or something like that nature, or it could have been the Sunday open mic. The one thing I remember most about him, he was like a real thought-provoking, intellectual kind of guy, but he was from Emerson College, I believe, or wherever, whatever. BU. And he was just a really, he was wearing the glasses, looked like the John Lennon glasses. And he would do this really smart material that, in Boston, the comedians were smart. You had Stephen Wright. You had some really brilliant people. This guy, Jack Gallagher, who was amazing. You had very original comedians, but most of the comedians, they were very high energy. They were they moved a lot because comedy came out of the bars in Boston. So you had to perform there. Oftentimes there'd be a television with a Celtics game on at a comedy club, and it would be on, and people would be cheering loudly, or if a goal was scored, and you think, boy, that joke really killed, but it was really the Bruins scored another goal. And so they had to be a certain way. But Marc was this really stayed. He planted his feet. He stood there. And I'll never forget one of his lines was, how he had taken some kind of LSD or some kind of drug and he wasn't used to. And he opened up the refrigerator of his apartment and Jerry Garcia was in there.
It's weird paraphrasing, but yeah, that's right. Not exactly a joke, but
that wasn't a joke. I just was saying saying what I remember, and so I noticed, and he was really special, really had a unique point of view. He wasn't the kind of comedian that I normally would book because he was a smarter comedian. He was a guy who stood there, and I was normally concerned with booking artists who were more high energy and who I felt could deal with these crazy Boston crowds. And I had a lot of one-nighters around town, whatever. And so later on, when I went to New York, I opened this club called the Boston Comedy Club in Greenwich Village on West 3rd Street in the late 80s and 90s. And I remember vividly this manager that I brought in. Her name was Gina Savage to run the club, and she had this great energy and this wonderful thing, and she said, I'm setting up an availability line, and the comics are going to call in, and I'm going to get this thing booked up efficiently, and it's going to be great. And I remember she said, I want to take you to lunch, and she took me to lunch, and she said, Barry, this is so great. Look at these comics that I booked here for this weekend, my first weekend. I'm so excited. And I looked at the list of the comedians, and without saying any names, they were all really wonderful comedians. And she says to me, look, Barry, I'm so excited. They all called into the availability line.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, I don't want any of those comics. I don't want them at the club this weekend. And she was like, what are you talking about? I mean, they want to work here. They're very excited to work here. They called in. And I looked at her and I said, I don't want the comedians who want to work here. I want the comedians who don't want to work here. I want the comedians who do not give a shit whether they work here or not or do anything. I want the ones like Marc Maron, like Dave Attell, like Louis C.K., like these people to come to the club. Those are the people I want. And she was, upset about it, but she understood the metaphor of what it was. And for me, the first time you came into the club, again, quoting you badly, one of the things I remembered was so amazing to me. You just walked in, you were from Boston, you came in, you really didn't have an assessment, I thought, of what New York was all about. And he walked into this club, which was like the Anne Frank comedy attic.
Before you built those booths on top, it was just like those horrible chairs everywhere. The plywood stage.
Yeah, it was like a Home Depot comedy club.
I don't know what it was, but boy, it was like it always looked like no one had set the room up.
Yeah, and ironically, the first person that did set the room up, the first person who ran the wires, who hooked everything up, and who was the first one on stage there was Louis C.K.
Yeah.
And so, but you went on, and I remember this vividly. You went on stage, and your first joke killed, and it was so wonderful, and I loved it. It was like, you were like, it's good to be here in New York. I've been here a week. It's rained every day. It just stopped raining today. And it still smells like piss here.
Yeah.
And then there was a pause, and you said, God can't even clean up this city. And I just was like, damn it. God, this guy's got, even though it was a piss joke in a way.
Well, you got to do those in New York when you first moved there. It's very important to do the smells, as someone who comes. The weird thing is like, do I start talking yet?
You can a little bit, but you can do whatever you want.
How long is this monologue?
It's one more thing.
All right.
I'm sorry, I modeled everything after you.
But there's a that's very funny. See, that's the funniest thing he said. He took a shot at me. But there's some gaps in your memory of our relationship.
I
But go
know,
ahead.
but
Go ahead.
we're gonna. There's a lot of gaps. So, they say that two things go when you get older, and there's only a pill for one of them. So that's the problem.
Wait, it's not for your conscience.
No, it's not for your conscience. So what I wanted to share with you is this. Getting you on this podcast was very, very difficult because I was reaching out to you a lot, and I didn't expect you to want to do it. I didn't want to expect you to want to be here, but I kept being persistent because I believed the audience would love to hear a side of you that maybe, just maybe, a part of what happens here would never be seen before. And I just wanted to share with you how it was back then in the comedy club scene for me, how I always wanted the people who didn't want to be there. I never wanted the people who wanted to be there. And I wanted you badly here, not just because of what the audience would love about you, but selfishly, I wanted you here because I knew in a way you didn't want to be here, but I knew afterwards you would want to be here. And everything in everybody's career who's listening, the one thing I want to point out to tie this up finally is the fact that you're always going to go out there, whatever job you're out for, whether you're an actress, actor, whatever you do. If you go to a place and they want you right away, go home and question it, because that might not necessarily be the place you want to be. But if it's a place that's not sure about your character or your comedy or your music or your law degree or whatever, but they're a great place and you want to be there, you want to fight to get there, and you want to fight to be in a situation where you can be in front of those people. Because when you can change somebody and you can turn things around and change the pattern and do something like that so great where you go in where there's a no that you turn into a yes, I can guarantee you that your career will go to the next level.
Yeah, but it might take, 25 years for it to go to the next level. The funny thing is like, people who say no, it's not like some decision they make. It's just they're the people that don't have any choice but to be the way they're going to be. They're not going to be a different way because it's not within them to do that.
But once you get in, you will change them.
Yeah, but it's weird what getting in means, or if it means, a lot of times people with me over the years have decided I'm a certain way. Well, that guy's the angry guy. That guy's the cranky guy. That guy's this, that guy's that. And then they try and wedge me into something and it doesn't pan out. And ultimately it took going outside of established show business without any agenda whatsoever to sort of, to get any traction at all. But the funny thing is about your memory of what went down, and I credit you for really giving me my start in stand-up. honestly.
You do?
Yeah, and publicly I've done that.
I appreciate
It's
that.
the only thing I give you credit for. and the, but no, because like in terms of my idea of what this podcast was, is that being the rebellious spirit I am in terms of what opportunities I have or haven't had over the years that I've been in show business. Like it seems to me that on some real level in my mind, being that it's not really my mind anymore because I have an understanding of show business. When I look at the guests on your show, I'm like, he's interviewing the enemy. He's interviewing all the guys that have shut me out. So there's some level of like, well, he's interviewing these executives, and I'm sure they've done a great job in all of their ways, as you have. But the context for what a great job is for you, to me, it's like sort of like, well, that's a guy that would never take a chance on me. So those are the guys that have kept me out of show business. So on some level, there's this line of like, well, there's the executives, the managers, the agents, the producers, and then there's us. The guys we're just cannon fodder for them. They're like, well, we'll bet on a horse. Like, oh, let's dump some money into that kid and see what he does. Well, I didn't do that well, so now he's out for 6 years. So that was my aversion. But it was interesting with you. Like the first time I did Play It Again, Sam's was I was still in college, and I had done a comedy team thing before with this kid Steve Brill. The first time I did comedy, we auditioned for this play. You remember when Catch a Rising Star did that thing, Comedy on Campus?
Of course,
sponsored by HBO. And him and I put together a shtick, and we auditioned for it, and we didn't get it. And but we were going to try to do comedy, and we put together an act. And they said the weird thing was we auditioned in the room I think at Boston College, and we killed. And they said we want to see you on stage live. And we'd never done that, really. We'd done it for our friends, So they put us up at the Comedy Connection, the two of us, and we tank like horrible, like just a sucking vacuum of like, not just bombing, more like, why? Why is this happening to us? and then it was like horrible. Then we tried to, to figure out what we were going to do together, and we wrote together. And then he went away that summer. It must have been like 84 or something. And I'm like, screw this. I'm going to go solo. So there was that summer where I rented a room on Egremont Street, which is right behind Play It Again, Sam's, kinda.
Yeah.
And I was drinking, and I was working at the last Jewish deli in Boston almost. It was out in West Roxbury, Gordon's Deli.
Now, this is what's also weird. I hope you don't mind me saying this. You mentioned that you were drinking, and I was very naive back then. I was from an area where, I didn't see people drinking. I didn't see people doing drugs. Even at Boston University, as crazy as it sounds to you, because you went there, and so did I was sheltered, and I don't remember seeing anything. And once I started booking these shows, I had this little electrical closet kind of dressing room. And
right at the bottom of the stairs.
At the bottom of the stairs, and people were like drinking, and literally you'd open the door, and there'd be a picture of a comic like ripped off the wall, and there'd be like lines on there, and they'd be doing lines of cocaine, and I'd just be looking at them, literally like almost as if I were to walk by a window with a woman undressing, just being like, what is happening here? So I just want to let you know that I never understood back then that you were drinking or doing whatever.
It was still reasonable. I mean, I wasn't a comic. I was just an aggravated, college kid who didn't really know what the hell he was doing. And I was there for the summer, and I decided like, I'm going to focus on comedy. So I went down there to do the open mics, and it was like, in my recollection of that time, I don't know that you and I had a lot of contact, but you knew I was around, but I was waiting around. Kenny used to host one of the open mics.
Kenny Rogerson, who's an incredible comedian who did Letterman at the time when he was in Boston.
It was great, and I think, was George doing a night there? Was George McDonald?
George McDonald alternated sometimes doing things.
So I just remember one night where, I'm on this list, and some guy I talked to recently, this kid Dave Ross, who's a comic here, captured it really well, is that you put your name on that list, but it's like you're dreading every second. You're dreading it. It's sort of like, all right, I'm number 7, and all you're doing, there's no excitement. There's like, oh God, it's going to happen. Oh my God, it's like in another hour, it's going to happen.
Well, I don't mean to go toe to toe with you, but I don't think that's true of all comedians.
No, it's just true of me. No,
yeah,
absolutely.
True of you.
So there was just this dread involved with. There was just this weird battle with it because it was so scary. And I remember like one night Kenny he got wasted and he forgot to put me on. And like I waited there all night. And, you know, as an open micer at that time, when you only had a few outlets, there was only a few clubs, and Sam's was one of them. You'd sit there and wait for hours and just watch this great audience slowly diminish. And, you know, by the time, you know, you watch an arc of a show, like 2 hours, it peaks out and then everyone starts leaving. And then there's 6 people and then they bring you on. And you've watched this whole, you know, slaughter of the audience. And I just remember waiting there one night for 2 hours and he got shit-faced. And I'm like, what's up? I was supposed to go on. And he'd already closed the show. And he's like, oh, man, I'm sorry. And I just invested 3 hours in that. So I did a whole summer of open mics down at Sam's. And I'm sure you and I came in contact with each other.
And this is interesting about what you didn't do, what you do now.
What?
If that were to happen to you now, after 3 acts, you'd walk up to Kenny and say, when am I going on? And then after 6 acts, you'd say, when am I going on? After 9 acts, you'd say, when am I going on? But back then, you just sat in the back, assuming that he wasn't.
Right. Or then you go look at the list, you know, to see if something had changed there.
Yeah.
You know, and ultimately it would because there'd be drop-ins. And then, you know, Lenny'd come in and do 45 minutes, or Dennis would come in and do it an hour. And you just sit there, you know, watching Chris Collins drink himself to death, you know, wondering, you know, what.
Wow, that brings back a lot of memories.
So, or DJ would come in for an hour. But I remember going down there and watching DJ specifically.
DJ Hazard.
Which is interesting because of, you know, you see, like in retrospect, you talk to Louis and you don't really, you put together these things of, you know, what an influence DJ was. He's a very unique guy.
DJ Hazard was, just so our audience knows, he was one of the sweetest men that you would ever meet. You never saw him lose his temper. You never saw him flustered. A comic could bomb so badly on a show he was hosting that they were booing, and instead of going on and shitting on the comedian, he would find a way to say something gracious and then get the crowd back. But at the time, he was a hardcore drinker. And he'd have a guitar portion of his act at the end of his act where you could slowly see the alcohol take effect, and by the end of the 20 minutes of guitar that he did, you probably wouldn't be able to understand a word he was saying.
Yeah, but that was back in the day where shit would come unglued on stage. In Boston, it was insane, dude. I mean, I saw Jay Charbonneau have a meltdown like I had never seen in my life. You would go to Stitches and you're just like, well, who's going to snap out tonight? You know, and Kenny would be faced, and then people would be yelling. It was amazing. But here's what happened. So that summer, I do open mics, and I couldn't hack it. And I'm like, fuck this. You know, I can't hack it. And I was still in college, so I didn't have to hack it. So after that summer in '84, where I did stand up all summer, I'm like, too much for me. Just waiting around, you know, drinking, and it just destroyed me. So I went back to school, and I didn't really do much comedy at all until I graduated college, and I was like, I'm doing it. And I end up in LA for that year where I got really up on drugs with Kennison and all them. And this is where you come back into it, is that I come back from LA and I'm beaten and I'm like bitter already. And like, you know, I've got maybe 12 minutes of material after being at the Comedy Store for a year, you know, doing these small sets, you know, just doing, you know, drugs with Sam and losing my mind. And I clean up and I come back to Boston. I get a job at the Coffee Connection. And like Dave Cross shows up one day and Louis shows up one day and there's the Catch a Rising Star thing happening and open mics there. But ultimately what happens is I do the WBCN Comedy Riot, 1988. Right. Mm-hmm. And I place second.
That's right.
And then you're around, you know, and I was doing open mics before that, because ultimately what happened is I reached out to you, or I showed up and I knew you were still booking. I don't know if it was Sam's at that time or what, but you had an operation at that point.
Yeah, I was booking like 50 one-nighters and comedy
and
clubs
colleges
all over
and stuff.
New England
One-nighters, which basically means he would subcontract out to some pub or bar and grill or bowling alley or some hole 200 miles away that he did very little recon with. So you would go to his office, but this happened later. You go to his office to get directions and you'd be like, where is this? You know, like, you know, you'd be getting $75 to open for another guy who you might have to drive like 300 miles. And you didn't know what you were going to walk into because some of those things lasted a week. You're like, you know, it was crazy. But what happened when I got back, though, I went and I did an open mic. And I think you still had Sam's, right, in '88?
Yeah.
So So I go on, and you're there, and I get off stage. He goes, "Yeah, you're not dressed well. Your jeans are ripped. Your hair is a mess. I mean, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, what? You're like, well, you want to do comedy or what? You're funny, but you look terrible, And I'm like, what is this, And then you're like, I'm gonna give you some spots. So you give me So for 6 months, you gave me one spot a month at Played Against Sam. So my entire life is working up to this spot, and then you're like, I'm gonna give you a paid spot, and I'm like,
but
great.
I would come and watch you.
Yes, you would.
I always came and watched you.
Right, but there was always this weird parental kind of I don't know what you're doing with that thing. So then you give me these spots, you give me these paid spots opening for Frank Santos, the X-rated hypnotist. So now I'm like, great, these are my paid spots. I'm doing 10 minutes in front of this weird fat guy that this audience just want to see women take their shirt off. He's going to make them do weird shit. So those are my first paid gigs, which you gave me. But
I gave you your first paid gigs.
No, you did, definitely. So
no, you did. Okay.
No, yes, you did. So then what happens? So I come in second in the riot.
Yes.
And then you're like, well, now he's ready to go. So now you're sending me out. You're the only person that's working me, and that's how I learned how to do time. Was from your gigs. A lot of people don't know that about the structure. Is that a lot of people now certainly don't come up in this at all. But the club system, you start as opener, you become a middle, and then you work up to headliner, and then your home club never works you. That's the way that generally works. It's you start an opener in a club, and then you work up to feature, and then you're out. You can't get. So, but with where we were, because of your operation and the Comedy Connections operation, there was these one-nighters everywhere. There were hundreds of them, it felt like. So you really learned how to do time by going into bowling alleys and fucking shitholes, in the middle, and they're like Pancho Villas and Leominster. Was that your gig?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So you drive out to
Frank's.
Yeah, Frank's in Franklin.
In Franklin with the guy named Frank.
Right, Frank's in Franklin.
Who had a gun on the table.
And he was drunk all the time. And that was a regular gig. You go down there every few months, and Frank would be like, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's Banditos in Fall River.
Yeah,
I don't know how you found these guys.
Because I was a salesperson at heart, and I would go on the road and sell these
What
people.
about that weird run at the ski areas? Mother Shapiro's.
Yeah, Mother Shapiro's.
You know who I did with that? I did that run. What was the other
one? The one in Burlington that was a really nice room, Hunt's or whatever it was.
The front in Burlington was a college bar, but there was 2 ski area gigs. I did those with Steve Baliga, who was doing a Walter Brennan impression. So... Yeah. I'm glad I'm taking you down memory lane. But
you mentioned Chris Collins. This guy did a Nixon impression, and back then in the '80s, it was still like an impression that you looked at and you're like, "This is like a Nicholson impression now."
Argus Hamilton still does Nixon, but Baliga did a Nixon too. But then there was what's that guy named Frank O'Donnell, Warren McDonald, George McDonald. I opened for all those guys. Did you?
At McDonald's?
Huh? I don't know.
No,
Al Ducharme was your guy.
Yeah.
I remember traveling with him, with Anthony Clark. So I was opening for all these guys. One of the did I ever tell you that story about Bob Bachelor?
No.
That's the best story in the world. So the first paid gig. So after the riot,
before you go, Bob Bachelor was a guy from Louisville, Kentucky. And he was a comedian who had this closing routine that was very original and unique, where he would have these signs that he kept around in one of those art billfolds that you carry around, and they were big signs, and it was he would talk about a word,
a southern
pronunciation of a word, and he would hold up the sign of how it was phonetically spelled, if you could, no, not phonetically, but how it would be spelled if it was spelled how you heard it.
Yeah, but he wouldn't explain what the word was. He'd show you this sign. It was like Meerfirminute, like MEERFIRMINIT. And he'd hold that up, and he'd be like, Meerfirminute, like, come here for a minute. Like, it would be the southern,
yeah, and,
that was the bit.
They always killed, and before you go into this, because I think I know where you're going with this.
No, you don't.
I think I do. So the thing is, Bob Bachelor was very similar to DJ Hazard in how he was off stage all the time, like the sweetest, nicest guy. But what happened was, which we found out, I think, which Mark is going to talk about, sometimes people are holding a lot in.
Yeah. I drove him. It was one of your gigs, probably. It was like 2 hours away.
Of course it was one of the gigs.
It was 2 hours away by some submarine base in Connecticut.
Oh, I know that was Dave Waddington's gig. It was like a 50s bar or something. Yeah.
That's it. That was it. So I'm driving Batch down there, and I don't know him, because these guys would come in from out of town, and he'd run them through the rooms. So I'm driving Batch down there, and about midway through, it just becomes like him going I don't know how the fuck you get on Letterman. How does anyone get on Letterman? I mean, just this torrent. It's just this river of bitterness. What the hell am I doing with going down to anger? I'm like, oh boy. So at that point, I remember having a list of all my material because I was just trying to do a half hour because it was the show was a half hour opener and then 45-minute closer. So all I was thinking about after I came in second in that contest, he started working. He's like, I got to get this half hour. So I go up there. I remember there was no one there. 9 people in the room, and there was that it was supposed to be a 50s bar, but it was like a budget 50s bar. So there was half a car that wasn't from the 50s. Whatever. I don't know what they were trying to do down there. But I go up there and I do everything I got, and I bring Bachelor on, and then I go to the bathroom and I walk out, and however it transpired in the 2 minutes that I was gone, he's screaming at the audience the same thing he was screaming at me in the car. I don't know how to get on Letterman. You think I would? And I'm like, and I'm like, oh my God. And I never did this again since, but I did do it this time. I didn't know what to do because it was, he had 45 minutes to do, and it was not going well. And I watched him losing it up there, and I stepped in because there was only 9 people there. I said, well, hold on. Let's relax. Bob, just take a break, folks. And I stopped the show because I wanted to get back on track. And Bob just looks at me for a minute. He goes, well, what am I going to do now? And there's this weird silence. I go, do the signs, Bob. Do the signs. and he did them. But, oh, God, yeah. And there was that gig with Frankie Bastille. But the point being that the weird thing I remember is that I do all these shows for you, and I didn't really work much for The Connection. I worked for you and Mike Clark.
The Comedy Connection, and Mike Clark was Lenny Clark's brother who booked some gigs.
Whose phone number I still remember. How crazy is that? I still know Mike Clark's phone number.
Well, you got to know who would come after you and probably take you down if you didn't do well.
Well, no, but those were the calls you would make. I mean, we would go to your office, you were just. I was just happy to be in the rotation, and somehow, given your concern about my ability to do my act in front of the audiences you're talking about, and you're right in saying that because there was a time there at Catch a Rising Star where, my crew down there, which was outside of the Boston. The world.
The Catch and Rising Star in Harvard Square was a different kind of audience and a different kind of eclectic group of comedians.
But a lot of those guys that you worked, they all worked through there.
Well, because I believe this is the weirdest thing about what I did back then, which was so misunderstood. I had this mixture of comedians that I used. I believed in the Marc Marons, the Louis C.K.'s, these kind of artists, but I knew I needed the boat act to close the show and kill. So I would book these acts that it was like one of these things is not like the other. Diametrically opposed kind of acts. A guy who would go on and do an hour of props and kill and get a standing ovation.
Just say his name. Ed Regine. He made a regional star out of a criminal. This guy,
he wasn't a criminal.
I don't know where the hell he came from. He was a used car salesman that was pushed out of that for turning odometers back. And this guy puts a Tina Turner wig on him and pushes him out on stage for an hour, and the guy becomes this regional superhero. Ed the Machine Regine.
He was doing like 15,000 seat plays or something.
It was crazy. No one knew where he came from or what the hell the deal was. But they whatever, man. But the point being,
he never snapped and said, "Why aren't I on Letterman?" Though, did he?
He never did. but yeah. So I would work Catch a Rising Star, but this was the amazing thing, and the opportunity you afforded me. If I'm going to give you credit, which I will. I don't know why I'm so reluctant to do that, but
thank you, Mark.
Was that you're sending me out to these places. And, you know, you got to connect with, and you're working like literally bowling alleys. You were doing shows in the bars of bowling alleys or motel ballrooms. A great gig he had was the Taunton Regency.
That's
Because
right.
it was a full weekend. And you'd have to go down to Taunton, you know, both nights, and you do a show in a hotel, you know, conference room.
And it was a tiered conference room.
Tiered
that
conference
one.
room. But it was a good gig because people would come. So, you know, you made me learn how to do that. But like guys like Dave Cross, it was hilarious because I remember one time, you know, because Dave would, you know, immediately confuse and lose an audience. Like he had this gift, like within 30 seconds, they didn't know what the hell to do with him because he was doing this Andy Kaufman thing. It was before he sort of evolved into straight stand-up. He was doing these characters and you never knew what was real, what wasn't. So we go to the front in Burlington, which is a college bar. It should have been fine. It was me and Dave, and he's going first. And like he's up there, and there's like 400 people in this room, and they don't know what's going on. Like it's 10 minutes of nothing.
Now the reason why I booked him on that gig is because the front, even though it was a college bar, it was one of those bars where they had legitimate music acts, legitimate comedy acts, and Burlington was they were very smart college kids. They had a really great point of view, and I thought that they would get him.
Yeah, he was genius. But the weird thing was that like I was the one guy out of my little crew that was able to go both worlds. Like I could play Nick's, I could do the gigs you wanted. But with him, like one time Dave was on stage at Jimmy's in Dedham. I don't think that was your gig, was it?
No, it was not.
And some guy came up and bit his ear. Like not in a bad way, but just because like he was drunk. But
Kind of a Lance Stevenson, Mike Tyson thing.
no, it wasn't aggressive. It was just weird. But like so Dave's on there, and I just remember being at the side of the stage going, "Come on, let me go on,
wrap it up."
But it's so interesting, like you were saying before about saying no and about this and that. That you know, Dave, you know, found his way. But the monumental moment with me and you was that there was this point where you're like. That I remember, like the week you decided to manage people. It must have, like there was like it's like all of a sudden like Barry's.
Did you think it was going to last a week?
Well, no, but it was weird because like you gave us all our gigs and you had a big thing going with NACA, and I was mad.
NACA, which was the National Association of College Activities.
Here's what I hated about your operation was that. Like, I never did colleges. You never sent me to NACA. I never wanted to pay the money. I wasn't really a college act. I didn't even know what kind of act I was. But occasionally, there would be these gigs where Linda, you're the woman who worked for you. Linda Sherman, someone would cancel. Like, so then I'd get this call from Linda. It's like, we got you a college, and they really want you. And I'm like, really? Okay. So like you go.
It's tonight.
Basically.
Well, why is it tonight
Right,
if they
exactly.
really want?
I never put that together. It's tomorrow. It's in Indiana. You know, and it's only because Anthony Clark canceled. You know, usually that was always the case. It's like Anthony couldn't make it.
Because he'd always get a sitcom or something like that.
Yeah, Anthony couldn't make it. So I go out to these, oh my God, there was that one I had to go to like Maryville, Indiana. I don't even know where it was, but I flew the next day and I get there and I meet the student activities person and like he's like, we just had a comedy show last night. And I'm like, well, what's this? What's tonight then? And I didn't realize that Anthony had canceled or whoever. So I go do this theater, and there's literally scattered like in a 1,200 seat theater. There's like 15 people, and there's an organ on stage. And I'm like, oh my God! And I just driven 2 hours through corn, you know, and like you know, like I walk in, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be bad. And I say to the kid, you know, can I borrow your watch? Because there was like I didn't even know if I was gonna get through the hour. You know, I didn't even remember who the opener was. But I remember it was awful, and I was getting no laughs, and there was no way to determine whether or not you were getting laughs. It didn't matter. So, like the second, like I saw that minute hand hit an hour, I'm like, I think I was in the middle of a joke. I'm like, gotta go. So I leave, and I'm running out of that place to the rental car, and I hear some kid behind me going, Mr. Maron. And I'm in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh, someone enjoyed the show. So I turn around, I'm like, yes, and he goes, yeah, my watch. You have my watch. And it was the kid who had lent me his watch, and I was like, ugh. And I give him the watch, and I drive away defeated. But the week you decide to manage, everyone gets a phone call. You got to meet with Barry. And literally, his office is in a basement in an apartment building. I think he managed. So like every time you went to go to get directions to whatever hole you were driving to, if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to walk through his life.
Just to let you know about this place, okay? So, how I got this place.
Yeah.
I've never laughed this hard in my life, which is very odd for you to think that I actually be laughing at you, but I am.
I know.
You're funny.
Okay.
I believe you're funny. You don't think I believe you're funny, but
I know you've always believed that.
I always have believed
Yeah.
in you. So the thing is, this apartment building, there was this open micer named Phil Bloom, who was literally like 100 pounds, and he went to an open mic night one time, and he came in and he's like, "Listen, I need some setup here. I got to do some things." It's like an open mic day. His first time on, and I don't know what's going on. And literally, he brings in a parasail, like a parasail with the board and everything, like literally like 18 feet long, to do this bit that goes nowhere and dies.
And then he's got to walk the thing off stage?
He's gonna walk the thing off stage, and it's like people are shitting on him the whole time getting off, and I'm like, man, what do you do for a living?
Open mics were great back then. They were great.
And he says, I'm a real estate agent. I said, wow, I've been in the dorms. I've been an RA at Boston University, and I'm looking for an apartment. He's like, I got something for you. Call me tomorrow. I call him tomorrow, the next day, and he says, I got a place. It's $150 a month. Heat, hot water, electricity are included, and it's like literally like the whole length of the building. It's like 3 bedrooms or a dining room and 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bath, everything, and it has a backyard, and it's yours for $150. I'm like, what's the catch? He said, well, there's some things you have to do there. So I go to meet there. I go to the apartment. You don't. Nobody knows this.
Yeah.
He shows me the apartment. We meet this woman. She is literally probably 1 month away from 4 tennis balls on a walker. Okay, she's got soup for me. She's got bread. She's got everything. She's made for me. And she says, I want to show you the apartment, but it's a little bit rough around the edges, but I know you can fix it. She's opening up the door. She's pushing open the door. She can't get open. Finally, we push it open. There is not a clean place to stand in this place. There are beer cans. I am not lying. Over 300 beer cans, paper, dust, debris, boxes, old furniture. It hasn't been lived in for probably 5 years. There was a guy who took care of the building, and he probably died there, I think.
Yeah.
And so she says, if you want this, you can have it for $150. You have to take the garbage out for all the tenants once a week, and you have to mop the stairs of the foyer once a month, and it's yours. And I said, okay. And I turned the other side into an office and did it all, and that's where I had my whole operation.
Nina and Linda.
Yeah, Nina Brower, who was also wonderful.
It was just where was I going with that? Oh, I remember management.
Management.
So okay,
now
so
you're talking about this management thing, and I'm embarrassed to say this, Mark. I do not remember having people take meetings and doing. I don't remember.
Well,
the
here, I'll
announcement.
tell you what it was.
So please refresh my memory about my career.
It was just like all of a sudden Barry's going to manage people, and I remember going to that apartment, and you basically just sat there, with the contract, and you say, I want to manage you. All you got to do is sign, and we're gonna do. It was weird. It was like what is this? I didn't know what the hell a manager did or anything. But the fact was, it was I bet you in 1 week you signed 12 people in that basement, and you just called in the people that you thought that you could do this with and manage. And I think it was Marcy Rose, Nick DiPaolo, Louis C.K., Al Ducharme, Ed Regine. There was this moment where when you decided to manage people, Anthony Clark. So you signed all these dudes. At that moment, I felt like the one guy. I'm like, what do I want to? In my mind, it's I'm not working for you. I don't need a manager. What do I need you for? And I said no. But
now I do remember. Oh my God! I swear to you, I didn't even remember the story. I did really want to manage you, and you were the only guy that said no to me that I wanted to manage, which goes back to the beginning of this whole thing about the no.
I was like, I don't know what that guy's going to do for me. And everybody else seemed to know what a manager did. I had no idea. I was barely getting work, and I wasn't doing colleges. And I don't think I knew, I don't think I knew about show business until like 3 years ago. How everything worked.
But it was weird, and part of it, like, I thought to myself, God, this is really jogging my memory. I swear to you, I did not remember this part at all.
It was like everyone was taking meetings in this basement apartment, and it was like Satan. It's like, just sign here, and I'm going to take care of everything. And I'm like, I don't know, man.
But this is where I guess I'm permission to speak freely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can take it.
I'm just realizing something right now of why at times I have had resentment towards you. Is because
this is my podcast.
Is because I felt like I gave you your first stage time. I believed in you when nobody else believed in you. I put you on paid gigs, albeit paid gigs, but you made money. You stopped working at that fucking coffee connection. And I got you to the point where you were a working comedian where you didn't have to ever answer to anybody else at some minimum wage place taking shit from a guy making a quarter more an hour from you. And I bring you into my office and I say, look, this is the evidence of what I've done for you. I want to take it a step further. And you said, let me think about it. And you said, no. And I never came back to you. And I never went back to you and
That's
said,
true.
You want to do this again, because I couldn't believe that you would have said no. But you did say no, and you took your own path, and you did very, very well without me.
It took a long time. But yeah, I don't like, the weird thing is I don't think it was necessarily personal, but it was just sort of like, I don't think I knew exactly what the nature of show business was. I didn't know what it meant. Like, I didn't really know that stuff until a few years later. I think I was just fighting this idea. Like, I didn't know how me and Anthony Clark fit in the same world. Like on some level.
You didn't, and you don't. And this is the weird part.
No, I do now.
But
I understand that, he does what he does, I do what I do, and they can coexist. But at that time I was I don't want anyone to have their hooks in me, or like, who the hell knows?
Well, I think the thing is that when I asked you and all those people, and Louis was the first one to say yes, before he was writing. I think
back when he was only noise punchlines.
Noise punchlines, that's right. He did a lot of noise punchlines.
Yeah.
If you watch this opening of Saturday Night Live, his first monologue, there were some noise punchlines there. So you still go with your tried and true sometimes, and
they were great. I mean, it was just funny that his evolution as a comic has been astounding and amazing, because literally at that time it was all surreal. Remember how surreal it was? I
just believed in Louis because he was I felt he was a nice guy. I felt he came from a nice family, and I felt like when he went on stage, he really worked hard at it, and he really wanted to be the best comedian that he could possibly be, and that was true of you as well. But Louis, right in the beginning, when I started managing him, I will share this with you, I didn't know what a manager was supposed to do. I didn't know. All I knew...
I must have sensed that.
Maybe. All I knew is that I was successful at doing something in the clubs, and I was feeling that I could do that and getting people opportunities there. So if I could get them opportunities there, why couldn't I create the relationships and get them opportunities other places? And then right away with Louis, I remember Jerry Seinfeld was coming into town, and he was doing like 10 gigs. And I thought to myself, okay, and I had booked him on 1 or 2 of them, Jerry. And I thought, oh, well, how can I figure this out? Louis would be the perfect opener for him. And I created a situation where I block booked Louis on 10 dates with Jerry Seinfeld. And that was he was like 18 years old or 19 years old at the time. And it was an amazing experience, and Jerry loved him and took him under his wing. And it was a situation where I realized right then and there what I was able to do and how to create a situation. And I want to tell you a story about how the differences in comedians starting and differences how they were when they got successful. I booked Jerry Seinfeld at a place called the Kowloon. And those of you listening from New England will know that the Kowloon is one of the most, probably the biggest, largest, and most unbelievable Chinese restaurants.
Route 1 in Saugus.
In our country. It's like
It's a good gig.
It's an unbelievable place, and upstairs they had a beautiful room that's separated into 2 rooms with one of those things like that you'd have like at a wedding or something
Partition.
like that, a partition. And when Jerry was booked, we opened the partition, and it was this like long, like huge, like comedy club looking place that held about 500 people.
It's astounding.
And when it was filled, it was beautiful. A little long and narrow, but still beautiful.
Yeah.
And the show was starting at 8 o'clock. And of course, when you have a big act like that and it's a place that's not used to doing these kind of things, even in places where are used to doing it, shows normally start late. They start 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, 15 minutes late.
But that wasn't an established gig yet. That was just you using the room.
That's right. I was using the room. Now it's an established gig. So Jerry's in the kitchen behind the stage, and I'm helping to get people in the room and making sure it's okay. And people are still coming in, and maybe half the people have come in because there's a huge line seating them. They want to make them feel comfortable. And I remember going backstage, and Jerry waves me over, Jerry Seinfeld. And I think he's going to tell me something nice like, wow, thank you so much. This is a great gig. This is wonderful. You're paying me more than I've ever been paid in this area. And he takes me in a corner, waves me over, and he gets in my face like this close. This is a guy I've known for a number of years. I've never had any altercation or anything. Gets in my face, and I don't know why he's getting so close. And I say, Jerry, good news, we're going to be starting in about 15 minutes. And he's like, no, you're not. You're going to start now. It's 8:03. I said, well, Jerry, there's still people coming in, and I just wanted to make sure the room was set up and really nice for you and whatever. And he looks at me and says, that's what the opening act is for. Get the fucking opening act on stage now.
Were you the opening act?
No, it was Louis.
Oh.
And so
You forgot that part where you used to open all these shows. It was horrendous.
We'll talk about that in a second. So I tell Louis, and he says, no problem, Barry. And I brought him up, and he set up the room nice, did a nice job. And Jerry was very impressed with what he did. And then after the show, Jerry and Louis were sitting at the table, and I thought, oh, my God, this is how when you're starting in any business, you don't know what people's idiosyncrasies are. All you know is where you grew up, the family that you have, and your friends. So that meant to me that Jerry Seinfeld fucking hated me, never wanted to talk to me again. I was an ass. I would never do business with him again. So I'm walking by the table. I'm even afraid to even go by the table, and he's waving me over the table. I'm like, yeah, Jerry? He's like, sit down, Barry. Come on, have a drink with us. I'm like, oh, okay. And like nothing happened. He was like nothing happened, and I was his best friend, and he treated me like $1 million. Now, you were talking about when I used to
It's so funny because Louis just did an episode where he opened for Jerry in that awkward situation.
So it's probably
I didn't
from
know
that.
about that stuff.
So you talking about how I used to open, because I did host a lot of shows
I'm a
back
Jew.
then.
I'm hung like a vitamin. I'm hung like a vitamin. It's the only one I remember. I'm hung like a vitamin. That's the only joke I remember yours. Because I think at that point I'd just check out. I think that was your opener. I'm hung like a vitamin. Look at my nose, and then I'm done. And there was still 9 more minutes of whatever the hell it is that you did.
I at least remember 2 things of yours.
I don't remember the other one. I think it was I'm a big Jew. I'm an oversized Jew, and I'm hung like a vitamin. And then there were a few other oversized Jew jokes, right?
God, the truth hurts. Anyway, so
that was the beautiful thing about you. Was he made the right call. Going like that. It was very clear to me that he obviously loves comedy, and he had to just let go of that dream, the mic dream, and do something So I thought you were just fueled by this horrendous bitterness that you were never able to be funny in the way you wanted to be. So
I was never bitter.
No, I know.
But the thing is, though, I have a different perception of myself hosting. I used to host certain shows at the club in New York and Boston, and the reason why I hosted was, to be honest with you, is I would save money by hosting. So if I hosted certain shows a month, I would save $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month, and it would be money that I could use to pay my $150 a month rent. And so, but I wanted to share with you, when I hosted a show, it was this interesting thing where I was a guy who, I guess in New York they call it a spritzer, a guy who just talks.
New York in
crowd.
1940, maybe, but yeah. Go ahead.
So I never had an act, as Marc so eloquently said, but I used to talk to the crowd. And as he will say, there's stock lines that people had, but I would have my own Rolodex of lines that I had. And I would have this thing where I would do like 10 minutes talking to the crowd up front of a show. And it would be like, I don't have the process now, but I would remember people and what they were. So if I was bringing up Marc Maron first, and he got off stage, and the applause was going on, I'd go back up. I'd say, Marc Maron, let's hear it for him. And the people from Revere, the guy from Chelsea,
Right, yeah.
the woman who hates me. And then I would do another thing where I would talk to a part of the crowd. And then I would bring out, let's say, Frank Santarelli. And then he would get off and the applause would go. And I'd be, Frank Santarelli, let's hear it for him. The people that hate me.
Yeah.
The people in Revere, Chelsea, the guy who's a lawyer who hates his job, and I would remember all these things. And if there was 8 comics on by the end of the show, I would, after I was all in comic, I would say all these things over and over again, so it would tie in the whole show. So I actually thought that I was a really great host. I wasn't a great host with it material. I didn't do material that people respected, and I certainly was not a respected comedian.
I like the way
I felt like I was a great host.
You presented that like it's a lesson. If you want to employ this tactic, all you got to do is remember where people are from, project that someone doesn't like you here, perhaps make note of what someone's drinking over there, and you can do a fairly efficient job. Here's the other thing Barry was known for. If because back then, you always helped me despite whatever resentment you had. Like when we
I don't have it anymore.
No, I know, but I understand it. But like when evening at the Improvs, or the 2 gigs that were available to us, the first TV gigs at that time. There's a lot now, but it was really evening at the Improv or Caroline's Comedy Hour. And I think that you might.
I helped you get your first television gig, evening at the Improv.
You did.
And this is where I think I remember. Evening at the Improv was your first gig, was it not?
Yes.
Let me explain this, because this is what I used to do in New York, which was crazy. Again, turning no's into yeses for the audience. Okay, there was this guy, Eric Fagan, who used to book Evening at the Improv. I would call these people and ask them and say, I have all these great people. There's all these great people in New York that I want you to see. This is when you were in New York. And I really want you to come and see them. And he'd be like, I'm in California. I got all the comics I need. And they would keep saying no. And all these people would say no. The Letterman people, everybody would say no. And what I would do is I offered these people round-trip airfare, the weekend in a nice hotel, all their meals, and the only thing they had to do is they had to go to 5 shows, 2 Friday, 2 Saturday, and see 50 comedians. And so those were the deals I struck, and that's what I struck with Eric. I finally got him to come out. He saw 50 comedians. You were one of them, and he picked 17 comedians that first time he came in that did Evening at the Improv from that showcase at my club.
Here's what was funny about those. Yeah, and thank you for that, by the way. It was not a bad set. I think Louis, he did his first one too. But and I don't think Louis would mind me telling you this, but there used to be this thing where, and Louis pointed out to me, we were at the Santa Monica Improv, and he knew. He said, okay, wait, watch Barry, all right, because he's got these gorilla hands, and he's going to start an applause break. So anytime his client was on stage,
God, it just reminded me of something else. I used to be like the human applause break.
Right? He would start him if he had a client on, a joke would go, you just hear this, and Barry would somehow with this magic ability to start applause breaks with his big old ape hands.
It worked.
I know.
And I created that technique. No one's used it since, but
maybe you should give a little tutorial on how to do that for up and coming managers.
This podcast has been totally different from everyone I didn't even introduce you. I haven't even started with your early years
right.
or anything like that.
We got through the early years. What do you want to talk about?
Jesus, just tell me how much time I have left. Be honest with me.
What, is there a light? I think there's someone waving a phone back there.
I remember playing against Sam's. There used to be a light bulb down. It was downstairs. There used to be a light bulb in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And they could see in the hallway. So I'd take my hand and I'd flicker the light, and that was the light, and that's how they would know. And
in the doorway.
In the doorway. And I'll never forget one of the first times I realized that comedians have outside factors that can even ruin the greatest moments. Now, there was this moment that happened and played against Sam's. Now, I'm sure you'll agree. If you're a white comedian and you get a standing ovation in a comedy club, you're doing something, and then you don't have props, and you're doing something special. Yeah. Okay? So I hadn't seen a standing ovation in my comedy club in 4 years from when I started. And this guy, Jack Gallagher, was this brilliant comedian, and I think he's in Sacramento now.
He's still great.
He does one-person shows, and he's just amazing man. And he gets a standing ovation. But a lot of these guys used to come to the shows with their wives or their girlfriends, and I'll never forget, he gets the standing ovation, and but he's doing the set, and you can tell something's building, and the wife is just pacing in the hallway, and I'm like, what's the matter? She's like, I don't know, I just want to get out of here, whatever. And she's jiggling the car keys in the light for him like this.
Yeah.
And he says, thank you, good night, and it's like a Jack in the Box. The entire crowd stands. They're going crazy. I don't think he had gotten a standing ovation at a comedy club before. He walks off stage, and I'm thinking, how is he going to handle this? Is it going to be the stage, the calling, or is it going to be family first? And one of the things that's the most amazing thing about comedians that they have to deal with in their lives is that a lot of times family isn't first. And when you see those people standing, you want to make your wife happy or you want to go back on stage, you'll go back on stage. And I was wondering what he would do, and he went back on stage to do the encore. And I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to take a moment here to just, if you don't mind, to just, because I didn't get to do this. And what I normally
We're starting the show now?
What is that pill? It looks like a pill with Jewish letters on it. What
It's
is
a
that?
nicotine lozenge.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's all right.
Louis Anderson used to say, I don't use the patch. I have the nicotine jacket. So
why'd I laugh at that?
Hey everybody, it's Barry Katz, and I wanted to talk to you about Blueprint for Success. This is a community that I put together during the pandemic to help all artists of every walk of life in the entertainment business. No matter where you are in that part of this journey, it's designed to help you. There are podcasts with people that will inspire you, like Kevin Hart, Judd Apatow, Bill Burr, that you can't find anywhere else but on this program that I've interviewed, to times where we get to talk to executives in the business that you would never have access to tell you what you need to hear and to answer your questions, to all sorts of different videos and master classes designed to help you get to the promised land. That's what the Blueprint for Success is. Doesn't matter whether you want to be a stand-up comedian, a sketch performer, a podcaster, an actor, an actress, director, writer, social media person, whatever you want to be. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've had the honor and been humbled to represent people like Chappelle, Wanda Sykes, Louis C.K., Dane Cook, and probably over 20 other people who went from a studio apartment to being a multi-millionaire and a household name. And I want that for you, and I wanted to take the time with this program to be able to help you on your way there, to get there and to heighten and increase the trajectory of your career. Blueprint for Success is the way to go. I'm proud to be a part of this program, and I'd be proud to have you to be a part of it too. So what I normally like to do, if you don't mind, even though it's very far in, is I like to go way, way back to the point, whether it be a month or a week, before you ever had any idea of being in the entertainment business. Where were you? What kind of life did your parents have, you have? And what was the moment that happened that you said, I'd love to be a stand-up comedian. I'd love to get in this business.
I think it was pretty. It was pretty early on. You know, my grandmother, who lived in New Jersey. I grew up in New Mexico, but my grandmother Goldie was a big fan of comedy. My grandfather loved slapstick comedy, and you know, she was a big fan of Shecky Green and going to Vegas and stuff. But I think the real moment, oddly, I think one of the earliest moments I remember about stand-up comedy was watching, like after school, I was watching like the Merv Griffin show or something like that, or the Mike Douglas show.
And for those of you people who don't know, these were syndicated talk shows, sort of like Ellen and Oprah's time slots.
Who do you think is listening to this show? 12-year-olds?
Okay, go on.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. For those,
But you know,
back in the old days.
But they were variety shows during the day.
Right. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No, I apologize.
You just reminded me how you could tell comedians don't really, oftentimes, certain ones weren't writing new jokes for their television sets, even though they might be for their club act. I remember seeing George Wallace doing Merv Griffin or Mike Douglas and saying some joke like, "Hey, I got mugged in Central Park. The guy put a gun to my head. He said, Carter or Ford?" I said, "Go ahead, shoot me." And then I saw him on Letterman like years later. "What do you want, Reagan or whatever?
Yeah.
Go ahead, shoot me." And I'd be like, "Okay."
That's a refillable, that one.
But anyway, go on.
No, so like I remember being a kid and Jay Leno was on. And he was sitting in the chair. I don't remember if it was Mike Douglas or the other one, or Merv. And there was just this improvised moment where they're going away to break. And Jay's sitting there. And Merv is like, I will be right back. And Jay goes, "What's going to happen? Is my chair going to fold into the wall like a game show? Am I going to like?" There was something about the moment and the timing of it, and I thought it was hilarious. And then I started watching Buddy Hackett. Like for some reason, I loved him. I loved Jackie Vernon. I don't even know where I first saw Jackie Vernon, but for some reason, I was so into Jackie Vernon. I must have been like 11 or 10 or 11.
And Buddy Hackett, told me that in 1953 was making $175,000 a week in Vegas.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
And he was hilarious, and I like those old guys. So, but my parents took me, like Jackie Vernon was playing the Hilton Hotel Cabaret Lounge. Like it must have been, in the 70s, I must have been like 11, and they somehow got me in. We sat right up front, and I watched, old, weird Jackie Vernon. I was right there, and I just saw, the weird, creepy darkness of being a nightclub entertainer. I was like, I want to be part of this. And then when I saw, when I was in high school, I saw Richard Pryor live in concert at a midnight movie with my buddy Dave. I was a big fan of the first season of SNL. I just always wanted to do comedy because they seem to be able to make sense of things, and they seem to have a handle on life. And I wanted to do that.
Which was a fallacy, because actually it was the exact opposite. And every comic that and everybody who knows a comedian knows that they do not have a proper handle on life, and that's what makes them so brilliant.
I know, but they provide that service for other people. Yeah, at your best as a comic, if you can make an audience see something differently, or disarm something that might have been an issue for them, or make them kind of like look the world differently, that's a tremendous service. And in most of my life, and one of the reasons why I didn't want you to manage me was that I never thought about it as a job. I really thought about it as this weird calling, and it was how I was going to make sense of the world. I don't really think I understood the nature of show business, or maintaining a haircut, or any of that stuff. I just wanted to be a great comic, and I wanted to be, have a point of view about the world. It was almost like I wanted to sort of complete growing as a person. It was not a job for me. I just wanted to be a great comedian, and I never thought about anything else. I just wanted to go on stage and work this shit out. So like the business of it was like, that seems complicated. I don't know what that means, that you want to manage me, So I think early on it was really, Buddy Hackett and Don Rickles and Jackie Vernon and Richard Pryor.
And what's interesting, your influences being those people, but the main first comedy show you saw was Jackie Vernon, which I believe, I hope you'll agree with me, is probably the closest or one of the closest. I look at you in this way, and you might not look at yourself in this way. I've always seen you as a combination of Jackie Vernon and George Carlin.
It's like a sad sack, aggravated guy. All right.
No, I don't think. I think when you talk about George Carlin, you talk about a guy who's on the Mount Rushmore of comedy.
Yeah.
So I don't look at him as a sad sack guy.
No, but Jackie was.
Yeah,
and
but
George
I
was
said
there.
I said part Jackie
No,
Vernon.
I'm okay with that. I get how I get
But I want to know what I want to know, if you'll oblige me, is I think it's important to know or to talk about what shaped you as a person. Like, in other words, it's always something that happens. There's always something that happens early on that blows a hole through people where they lose their innocence. And then they become the brilliant person they are and what they want to be. What was the thing that blew the hole through you, and what happened?
Well, I don't think that that was necessarily a good thing in retrospect, but I think certainly what blew the hole in me was the year I spent here as a doorman at the Comedy Store, and the time I spent with Kennison and in that place that he was at, which was not a happy place, and I had very little knowledge of Kennison, when I moved out here.
And I remember that when you came back to, I believe, Boston or New York or whatever, this is another thing that as I guess I was very naive, or I didn't understand. Marc would come back to my office and he would tell me these stories about Sam and the things that Sam would do to him. As a doorman at the Comedy Store, just for those of you who
didn't
don't
get too weird. That makes it sound like, well, there's I got drunk and he fucked me in my sleep. It's nothing like that.
No, but he fucked your mind.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And so this is the thing, is that for those of you who aren't in this business, what happens at a lot of comedy clubs, a lot of people get started by doing the door or doing certain bouncing or ticketing at comedy clubs. Chris Albrecht, who's now the president of Stars and was the president of HBO, was a doorman at the Improv. A lot of people start that way. It's their way to get in.
Dave Becky was the doorman.
Dave Becky was a doorman.
The Improv in Irvine, I think.
I was a doorman. A lot of people did that kind of stuff to get in the business. And because it's almost like going to college. You actually see the people performing. And if you're nice to people and aren't an asshole, you get thrown a bone once in a while. Somebody doesn't show up, you get to do 5 minutes and stretch while somebody's going on. And then if you do well, people see that you do well, and they're like, oh, well, we can count on that guy. We feel safe with that guy. And so Marc would come back to my office in Boston and tell me stories of how Sam would torment him in this house that was above the Comedy Store that Mitzi Shore still owns, that the comedians used to stay in, and she used to give them the house to stay in, probably for free or very little, but they had to do responsibilities or free sets or things like that.
Drive the Jeep. Got to drive the Jeep. Got to go get her chicken salad at Chin Chin.
And I'll never forget.
Got to drive Mendoza and Caponera to the Burbank Airport to do the dunes. I haven't slept. Doesn't matter.
And I'll never forget, he sat in my office and Marc was, very distraught, and he told me that Sam was tormenting him, and I tried to give him advice, and then he broke down and he shared something with me that it's almost like wolves out in the wild marking off their territory. He told me a story where he came back to his room and Sam Kinison had pissed on his bed. Just stood up, taken it out, take a long piss on his bed, and just left it there.
It's a great story. Like, just when you just say it like that, it's kind of weird.
No, but this is how you told it to me, and it was like, and it was in my mind.
I never slept in the bed again. That was the end of that. Yes,
but in my mind, as a guy who I was always a guy.
I wasn't there when it happened. Okay, go ahead.
I was always an everything's gonna be okay guy. And I was always a guy, when people came in my office, I felt like I gave them good advice, and I felt like I made them feel better when they left. it was one of the first times in my life where somebody said something to me where I didn't show it to him, but I was like, in my mind, I was like, the hamster wheel was going, because I was like, I got nothing. I don't know how to comfort this man. I don't know what to say other than what I did say was, you got to get out of there. You got to find your own place and find your own world, and you'll gain his respect. It's like when you're in the schoolyard, you can't tell this to your children, but if you're bullied, the only way that's ever going to work, it's not going to work whether you tell your mom or your dad or the teacher. What's going to work is when you punch that bully right in the face, and then you get the shit kicked out of you by that bully, but he will never touch you again.
Wow, I think that...
And in case, the advice I gave to Marc was very similar, is that the way to get to Sam is to pretend like it doesn't bother you and just move on slowly to your own life and keep moving. Like Ellen said in Nemo, what are you doing? Just going to keep swimming. Keep swimming.
Well, yeah, I ended up running away, but it was fairly dramatic. But I left, after that shit went down, I left the Comedy Store because the drug dealer gave me the same advice. And when the drug dealer tells you it's time to go, the one guy that wants you around for his own reason says you got to get out of here. It's like, I better get out of here. The coke guy's telling me I got to get out of here. It's time to get out of here.
But I think our audience would enjoy the story.
Okay.
You wonder what were you wondering?
I'll tell it again if you want. But it was funny though, because I think that if I was in New York and I was living out here and I'd come back, did you get me that Rascals?
Yeah,
TV
Rascals
show?
Comedy Hour. Yeah,
you did.
Yeah.
So because someone just put that online recently and I looked bad, and it must have been that trip because I
had to get new clothes and cut your hair. You didn't listen to me.
Oh, it looked bad. And then I remember one time because I was doing I don't remember when it was, but I slept in the back of the Boston Comedy Club after you got the couches, because I didn't have anywhere to sleep. I was in New York one weekend. I remember going up through the bar and just laying. That's crazy times. Oh, the story about him pissing on my bed was ridiculous. Do you want me to tell it here? I told it before.
Because I think it's important to the audience to let them know the trajectory of where you were coming up as a comedian and how you felt when you got that gig as the doorman, and now you get the Mitzi says, hey, you can stay in the house. And it's this feeling like, wow, I belong. I'm part of an affiliation. This is what I always
part of something.
This is what I always wanted.
It doesn't go away, that part. If you have a relationship with that particular place, it doesn't go away. It's a very unique situation. What had happened was, and I'll tell the story because there is a punchline to it, is, I had become the guy, I was the head doorman, and Sam had been a doorman. And Sam, when I got the job, was on the road. I met Carl LeBove, his opening act, and there were sort of these hoops you had to jump through to get into this crew. So Sam comes back. I meet Sam. The first time I meet Sam, we're up at the house. We're going one-on-one. We're doing blow. He's looking at me. I'm looking at him, and we just stay up all night. And he was saying look me in the eyes, Maron. Can't trust a man doesn't look me in the eyes. I'm like, what is happening? So we do that, and it was all very strange. But, as things progressed, I became Monday nights at the Comedy Store were no cover nights. So all the freaks would converge on the store from the Roxy, from all over Sunset Strip to see Sam, because he was this thing.
And I used to come when I came to L.A., and Sam would close the shows in the
crazy.
Original room. And the Comedy Store, for those in the audience who don't know, there's 3 rooms in the Comedy Store. There's the belly room, which is upstairs, which holds about 80 people. It's a red room.
That's where we could work. When I was there, you were a non-paid regular if you were a doorman. And what you would do is you could work in the belly room, but you'd have to pull people from the other shows up into the belly room. So there would be people leaving the main room, be like, hey, you want more comedy? You just saw a great show. Why don't you come see a bunch of amateurs bang their head against the wall upstairs?
Yeah,
so,
and the main room holds about 400 people. That was a showcase room.
Right.
And then the original room is another room
Smaller
up front, which
room.
holds about 150 to 200 people. It's all black. So they all had a different style and a different way about them.
Right.
And I would go when I came here to see Sam close the show, and he would always get on stage, take the mic off the mic stand, and throw the mic stand as far as he could. It would bounce off the stage, hit some people in the crowd, and then he would start.
It was amazing because when I got to the store, I had seen him and he didn't really resonate with me. I thought it was a gimmick. But then he started to get into his thing. And like in terms of like really what happened to me in that moment you're talking about was that like I'd never seen anyone push it out as far as he had. I'd never seen anyone do anything as challenging as what he was doing, comedically or otherwise, to sort of take the positions he took around Jesus, around sex, around morbid curiosity. It was like he created a whole terrain of comedy that was like way the fuck out there. And I'm like, that takes balls. And, and just the idea of owning a stage like he did. Granted, he comes from preaching, but that resonated with me, is that you decide, what you're going to do with that real estate up there. But so ultimately what happened was we were doing a lot of drugs. I became sort of the lackey of the bunch. He would come on Mondays, and the place would be packed, and he'd give me a couple $100. And I was living at that house that Mitzi owned, and that became his designated party house for Monday night. So he'd give me $200. I'd go out, I'd get booze, I'd get cigarettes, I'd stash booze, I'd get everything set up. So when the comedy store closed, he would show up with a bunch of pirates and gypsies and freaks, and we would end up just doing blow for anywhere from a night to 3 nights up there. So that was my job. I lived in the house, and I was the host of this insanity.
What was if you had to look back, in Sam's mind, what was the purpose of that after party? Was it just to do drugs, to have a camaraderie with the comics, to get laid? What was the whole purpose of that after party?
He liked to hang, he liked to party, and he liked to hold court. So like, it would be, there was this huge wooden table, and he'd get the drugs out and get the booze out, and everyone would sit around this table, and Sam would just hold court.
So that was his, like for comics now who are chasing pussy after every show, that was his sex, holding court.
Well, he had sex, but
you know what I mean.
But not there. I mean, like it was, the weirdest thing was there was a couple of moments with that where, like there were guys, people, I didn't know that I was living a weird life, but I remember Steve Pearl,
from San Francisco.
Yeah,
originally.
I said to him, why don't you ever come up to the house? He goes, why? To listen to how Sam invented water and the printing press? And I'm but he eventually got sucked in. But the weird thing about Sam was after the party, a lot of times he would just pass out on the floor of the house. Like this was the biggest star in comedy, and everybody would go. And and Sam would be sleeping face down on the living room floor. He liked to sleep on the floor. And there was like times where, I'd wake up the next day and I'd have a girl come over or something for lunch, and I'd show her the house. I'd be like, this is my room, this is the kitchen, that's Sam. It was bizarre. So here's the pee on the bed story. And was that it got dark, and Sam was dark, like he knew how to fuck with people's heads. He knew how to make you feel part of him. Like he was a preacher. So, you would feel like, important to be around him. And this is also the lesson I learned. If you were a young comic, do not become what Mike Becker, the old manager at the store, do not become a satellite comic. There's a price to pay. If you're going to
define satellite comic.
Well, there were guys like Sam, and there were guys who had entourages. Dice used to have them. Dice would show up, and the thing about Dice, like Jimmy Schubert, went from he was a Dice guy. So like if you hung around Dice at that time too long, you'd end up with a nickname. You got to be careful, because like his girlfriend was Cheesecake. You had Hot Tub Johnny.
Wheels.
You had Wheels. You had Jimmy Jumpstart Schubert, or what the hell. I'm like, you want to hang around Dice too long, you'd be like, hey, there's the Muffin Marin. But the thing is that
it's interesting. I just have to say this about Dice, and one of the first times I realized
I love Dice, by the way. I'm just saying at that time, I interviewed him, and it was great.
One of the first times I realized the relationship the comedians had with Mitzi from afar, because I didn't know that. All I knew is what Marc would describe the environment.
Yeah.
Was one of the things you don't know about me is that when the Young Comedian special happened with Lenny Clark opening and Dom Herrera and Carol Leifer and Dice, I was there in the front row.
Yeah.
At Dangerfields in New York. And I'll never forget, I met Andrew because Dice's name is Andrew Silverstein. Mm-hmm. And I used to know him as Andrew.
I got a great Dice story.
And we're in the front of the club, and somebody comes in with these flowers, this beautiful bouquet of flowers, and it's for Dice. And he opens the card, and it says something like, hey, dear Dice, good luck to you. We love you. From Mitzi, the Comedy Store. And he ripped up the fucking note, and he said, fuck Mitzi, show up. and he like tossed the flowers or said, gave it to someone. Here, you take these.
You gotta love dice.
And I was like stunned that I thought that she was the one who gave him a lot of activity and a lot of props. Yet and I felt the same way. Then it tied together when I saw that of how I felt that moment in that room, that basement where you said no to me.
Well, look.
But keep going with your story. I don't want you to
No,
get there.
all right, but the Comedy Store, there's an evil that lives there. And you're not sure what it is. It's ill-defined. But, if you feel it, you feel it.
I'm very sure what it is.
I don't know. It might predate civilization. It might just be it's an Indian burial ground. I don't know what it is. But, the dynamic that Mitzi created there was not, no matter what the community is.
You just said it, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's important. In any profession that anybody has out there, you're going to find different areas of your profession. There's going to be, and your friendships as well, and everything. There's going to be the darkness, there's going to be the light, and then there's going to be the people who
And then there's the Comedy Store.
And then there's the comedy. There's going to be people who walk between both worlds seamlessly.
Right.
And those who can't. And when you go to the Comedy Store, there's a kind of comedy that's a dark comedy. It's a darkness. In my mind, at the time when I was going around at the Laugh Factory, at that time, there was a light. And at the Improv was the in-between. Now it's not so much.
It's funny because I don't work at the Improv. I don't work at the Laugh Factory, but I still go back to. Let's arc this out, or else we're going to be here all day. So,
I'd actually enjoy that.
I know. I'm sure I could do it, but
what's the longest podcast you ever did in your life?
I don't. With my own was with Bob Zamuda because I couldn't stop it. It was 2.5 hours, and it was spectacular, but it was exhausting. So. All right, so here's what happened. So I'm this guy. I'm the guy who sets things up. Now, to set up what happened up there, I was out of my mind. I was losing my mind on coke. I was sleep deprived, and I was very much on the Sam, trip. But the thing about satellite comics is that you think that they're going to take you with you. You think that they're going to help your career. They are not. Is that, if you start in, because Sam used to do that, like, Maron, I'm going to save you some time. And then in retrospect, I'm like, what, by killing me? Because, they're not, if you get lost in someone else's dream, to find your own becomes impossible. So ultimately what happens, there's this Satanist that hangs out at the store there. It was very annoying. His name was Dave. He was a junkie. He looked like, Christopher Walken. And he was a Satanist, whatever the hell that means. So he had a pentagram tattooed on his heart. He had some other tattoos, but he was annoying. And he used to hang around. The store attracts a very quality crew. So Sam hated this guy for whatever reason, because Sam was practicing his own version of Satanism, whatever that was. You call yourself the Beast. You got to assume that, he believed it on some level. So what happens is one night, I set up the house, we have the party, and the Satanist shows up. And he was a fairly harmless guy, other than he was annoying. Satan apparently doesn't pick, great people to follow him. But so the Satanist is there and Sam's there, and in the middle of everything, the Satanist, who's not supposed to be there, says to Sam, like, you're not a real Satanist. I'm going to tell Anton LaVey about you. Who cares? Whatever. This is complicated. So Sam, gets up and he throws a drink in the guy's face and punches him, and, there's chaos. Now, the guy won't leave. And I'm like, oh, Christ, and it's my house. So in my bedroom was a bunch of musical equipment that Sam had left at the house because we had a jam session. So basically what I do, for reasons I don't quite understand, is I tell Dave, I go, well, just go in my room. I'm going to lock you in there and just stay out of his face. So I lock Dave in my room with all of Sam's musical equipment. And then I got to go because I got to pick up my friend who's coming in from Boston, right? My friend Bill. And I told him about how great everything was in LA and how fun it was, right? So I go pick Bill up and I'm like, I don't want to go back to the house. I'm just going to sleep in Bill's hotel room. So I slept in Bill's hotel room. And then the next morning I go back and now there was 20 people when I left and now there's 3 people. And I don't even want to mention names because one of the people was there. That was a life-changing moment for her. And she changed, she'd never been there before. And she was like, that's it. Whatever the hell is going on. All right.
So she wouldn't want you to say that.
No, she's a comedian and it doesn't matter. But so it's 3 people. It's Sam and Carl and her. And I walk in with Bill. And I'm to show him my house,
and Bill's
with me. They're from Boston,
okay.
Right? So we walk in, and it's still going on. Whatever, this is what's left of what happened the night before. And, like I look in my room, first I show Bill my room, but the door had been kicked down and all the musical equipment was gone. And the bed was whatever. And I walk in with Bill and Sam just sitting there, at with just the leftovers of a night of debauchery. And I'm standing there with Bill and Sam goes, Maron, I pissed on your bed. You want to know why? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, because you let that asshole sleep in there with my guitars. And then I turned to Bill and I said, I told you I knew him. But I never slept in the bed again. And I didn't know that. I said that until Carl LeBeau reminded me. But ultimately,
that's where you lost your innocence.
Well, that whole period. But see, the thing is that I had to regain my innocence, because what happened after that between Kennison and the influence of Hicks, and that I became I became bitter, I became angry, I became driven by provoking an audience, challenging an audience, and I don't think it was my nature, because I'm now back to my nature. Like the nature that you saw when I was younger was a fairly sensitive, intelligent, neurotic guy, and angry, but not like that. So I sort of became this angry comic for years, and really insisted on it working. And I did okay. I was able to sustain a career in show business one way or the other, but I was never able to really get much traction. And it wasn't until, I started doing the podcast, until I lost everything and I had no real prospects, that, I was humbled to the degree where I was able to get back to who I really was, or maybe to get there for the first time.
Well, this is an interesting time that I really want to talk to you about, because I think it's fascinating for our listeners. And so you were managed by Dave Becky, who is one of the best managers around. He's a really knows the business really well, and I met him for the first time when he was an assistant at Messina Baker Miller.
Me too, yeah.
Rick Messina,
yeah.
Richard Baker, who represented Tim Allen and Drew Carey, and Jimmy Miller at the time. They were partnered, and Jimmy represented Jim Carrey, along with a few other people, Judd Apatow. And Mia Apatow was in the pit. Dave Becky was there. And so he was managing you. And this is one of the most interesting things about your career that I love. And it came around the time that you started to do the podcast. You made a change, and I'm a guy, I'm a manager, and I'm as very well documented. I've been fired many times.
I know.
and so people.
I'm sorry I didn't get the opportunity to do that.
There's still time. And so the thing is that I've been on the other side of that. So I think it's really important that people don't know that side of the business and what artists are thinking at the time when things aren't necessarily going the way they're going.
Well, look,
and what was the purpose of how an artist thinks in that terms?
Well, here's what
especially
happens.
You, where you decide I'm going to make a change here because I don't think it's working.
Here's what happens. Look, Becky, again, I didn't understand show business, and I didn't understand that, that your job as a manager, you're not necessarily our friend. This is a business. Now, well, obviously, you're going to have a relationship with your clients. Now, Becky, I signed on with Becky, when I had, I got the job on Comedy Central hosting Short Attention Span Theater, the last version of that. And for me, that was like, I can't do this. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I'd moved around a lot, and I get this gig in New York, and it's to host a clip show. And I'm like, this is not the kind of comic I am. And it was a very difficult decision, because I wasn't making money as a comic, but here I get this opportunity to be on TV, 4 times a week. But it's completely contrary to who I am in my mind. But I take the gig, signed on with Dave and with Ruth Ann. And the truth of the matter was, I did that show for a year. It taught me how to read prompter. It taught me a lot of things I think were invaluable. But ultimately, over the course of 20 years with Dave, it took me a long time to realize how your side of the business worked. And I should have realized it with you early on. Because I remember you'd walk into your office in New York. This was hilarious.
I had an office at 57th and Broadway.
I wasn't even a fucking client of his. And you'd walk in, and whoever was on the phone, when you'd walk in the door, they'd look up and go, "Oh, Marc Maron's very funny as well, if you're interested." It was like almost like he gave a directive. If any comic walks in, make sure you're talking about them on the telephone to whoever you're talking to. So, right?
I didn't do that all the time. I just did it with people who I believed in.
Okay, fine. So ultimately, what happened with Becky and what I ultimately learned was that, you guys can only do so much. I don't know what we necessarily expect out of you. I don't know,
But I think I want to know what you did expect out
I'll
of
tell
him and
you.
what
All right,
didn't
relax. So, so there's this idea that, like, either you're going to get heat or you're not. So
no
I
one's
stayed
ever
with
told me
Becky.
to relax, so that's a very unique thing for me.
Whatever it was, like, most of my early career was driven by spite. Most of my early career was like, I had Dave Becky, he was a big manager, and if I'd see somebody else get something, I'd call him up and go, how the did he get that? Why am I not doing that? Now, in retrospect, the truth was I wasn't ready to do much of anything because I didn't understand show business, and I was just letting people try to put me in boxes. So the thing about Becky is that over the years, we did get, I had a deal with NBC that, we wrote a script that didn't go anywhere. Then we did another script for NBC that didn't
But you
go
also
anywhere.
had a role in Almost Famous where you were fucking fantastic.
Yeah, it was
in
like a
that
minute
movie.
in a movie that went, and then I never got another movie. The thing was, I never knew how to get traction, and I relied on Dave, and I never understood it. It's like, you manage everybody, can't you just make a call and take care of something? So what happened was, so I got a deal at NBC, and then I did a deal at Fox years later, and then I had a deal at HBO to write a script. All of these script deals, and I was doing comedy, but I was not selling tickets, so I was not, I didn't get consistent work. I get fallout weeks from the Improv, and I'd work anywhere I could, but I didn't understand the dynamics of even live performing. I thought that I go out on the road, I do whatever the fuck I want, and that's it. I didn't think about building relationships with club owners. I didn't think about building relationships with casting directors. I didn't think about building relationships with agents. I was just sort of like, I do what I do. When are you guys going to do something for me? I never understood any of the politics of the business. I didn't understand that, like, all the people I started with at that time, like, especially out here, that, like, agents, managers, performers, publicists, they all come up generationally. And, the smarter people were social people. I was like this weird lone wolf who had a chip on his shoulder, who everybody was like, that guy's fucking pissed off. And like, he's an asshole. And I thought, like, well, that's what I'm a comic. You. But the truth of the matter is, developing relationships and understanding show business, it behooves you to do that. All right. Not my style. So ultimately, over the arc of 20 years, I did make a living in show business, until towards the end when things were going south and I was getting divorced. But what happened with Becky ultimately was I realized that I was very loyal to him. And, and I had expectations out of him. And when it came down to 5 or 6 years ago, like, if you don't have any heat and you're just a guy that's been sitting on the vine, rotting, and they don't know what to do with you. What's he going to do with me? So, and ultimately he's got bigger fish to fry. And so, like, I didn't realize till later that I didn't even have an agent. Like, ultimately what would happen is, like, why don't I have an agent? And I think Becky would make a call to some agent and go, like, can you do me a favor? You're handling this guy for me and that guy for me. Can you just send Mark out to think he's represented? So, like, and I'm making it kind of work like that, though. And I didn't really understand that's just the way show business works. I had very deep emotional expectations and professional expectations that were just not really your job, because I wasn't doing my part necessarily, other than just, going like, why, when. And I think not unlike a relationship with a lover or a husband or a wife, like Becky, I think, loved me as a friend and he wanted to represent me, but you just tap out eventually. And what I didn't realize by the time I finally left him was that he must have been as frustrated as I was. He didn't know what to do with me. And I do think it probably weighs on you guys a little bit, but there's also something within your profession that, you can't get that attached. That, that ultimately you don't have all the answers. And, when the chips are down, you may not know what to do with somebody, and you're just going to have to take the hit. So what are you going to do? That's the nature of your job. So that day comes, you finally make that decision. Well, it was a weird decision because what had ultimately happened was, like, I had a problem with his assistant at the time, who's now a manager. And it was a very weird moment. And I guess I'll be candid because Dave and I are okay, and it is what it is. But there comes that moment where, I got something going. We might have a little deal with Comedy Central, do a pilot. And, and I meet with Becky, and Becky had we had this weird dynamic. Like, I'd have a meeting scheduled with him, and I'd get there and to talk about my career, and he'd be like, yeah, I want to go buy a shirt. You know, so like, you know, we'd end up walking around Barney's, and he's like saying, like, you know, what do you think of these shoes? Like, these are, you know, $1,200 shoes. Like, you know, I barely got money in the bank. He's like, I think I'm gonna get 3 pairs. And I'm like, what is this? Why are you doing this to me? You know, so, but you know, that was just his style. But there comes a point where like I go in, I got an opportunity, and I want to meet with Dave, and I'm like, oh, so we're gonna do this. He goes, you know, I think Josh is gonna, you know, be the driver on this. So like in my mind,
Josh
I'm like,
Lieberman.
right? In my mind, I'm like, I'm not gonna be the assistant / new manager's, you know, the guy that, you know, gets saddled with the old client. I mean, I know how that works. It's like, you know, Josh is going to build his stable of young comedians, and like, oh, I got Maron too. Like, I'm not going to be that guy, you know? So I'm like, I can't do that. I don't, you know, I'm not even getting along with Josh at the moment. And you're not, I want you to deal with this. You're my
But how
manager.
did you handle it in the room?
Well, that's how I handled it.
Okay.
Like, I was mad at Josh for like lying to me, which, you know, either you guys do well or poorly. He had not gotten the hang of it. So it is, it's part of the game. So,
well,
whatever. So just let it sit there for fuck's sake. You know, don't make an idiot out of me on your own couch. So like, I was mad at Josh, and basically like it came down to, you know, me in the room with Becky. I mean, you know me. I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm going to let Josh handle this. You're my manager. I want you to handle it.
Was Josh there?
No, he was sitting out front. And he's like, it's like I'm pissed off at Josh because it's bullshit and whatever. I was at the end of my rope at that point, you know, and it was, you know, I was already tentative with Becky anyways because I was doing the podcast. It was starting to get some attention. And he was literally like, how do I get it? What is it? You know, and you know, no one knew at that time. But I said, I'll bring you some stuff. I'll bring it into you. I'll bring you a CD or whatever. So I bring him the CD, and he's sitting there with me in front of me listening to this. He's like, where's the what the fuck? What's the angle? You know, what I don't get it. And I'm like, oh God. You know, so, but it was not in his wheelhouse. So again, I'm not going to fault him for that. Really, the thing came was like, you know, he said, all right, I'll handle this. It'll be me and you. It's fine. You don't have to, you know, it'll be me and you. And I'm like, good. And as I'm walking out, he goes, now go apologize to Josh. And I'm like, it was almost that moment like in Goodfellas, like, go get your shine box. I'm like, fuck you, know, like in my mind. So I just, but it wasn't that dramatic. It was like, I needed to move on because, you know, him and I it had worn out. And I think that we had worn each other out, and he was at a different place now. I mean, he was much bigger than dealing with a guy that had been doing it, you know, 20 some odd years, that, you know, was not really a known quantity, but known enough to be like, oh yeah, Maron. So like, there was nothing, you know, he could really do on a day-to-day basis for me.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating about this time, and also about management, is that just me being a manager, one of the things that you look at in every profession, like you as a comic, you look out on the landscape of what other comics do and who's doing the right stuff and who isn't. And you look at managers who are doing the right things and who aren't, and the relationships. And one of the things, sometimes you look at people like, you know, Dave Becky, or you look at somebody who's older, let's say like David Steinberg, who's represented like Robin Williams and Billy Crystal for 40 years, and you say, that's what, when you're a manager and you represent somebody, that's what you aspire. You want to represent them when you're in a wheelchair. And so sometimes when you're representing people for a long time and then you see one of the people leave the nest, you actually say to yourself, well, how did this transpire and how did it happen? Because you see so many people out there who have made things last and have done things. But I truly believe that the moment came that you wanted to leave that situation was right at the beginning, coinciding with when you wanted to start the podcast.
It was around,
and I believe that's it. And I think that just before we get into the final roundup of things, I think it's important again for the audience to know what was the moment that happened where you realized, I'm not getting it done in this way. People are trying to put me in a box. How can I go out and be my own voice? And what can I do? And how did you know to do this thing with the podcast? And how did you know?
All right. So it was really when the podcast started to sort of get a little bit of heat in the small way that it did at the begining.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about before you started the podcast.
Okay. Well, what happened was, ultimately, Becky had, Becky and I are fine, and he did a lot of work for me, and we tried. Okay, just because you're talented or you think you deserve something, it doesn't mean it's going to work out. And the truth of the matter is, in retrospect, I don't know that I was ready for the opportunities that I might have had any of those scripts gone to pilot even or gone to series. I was not I was not responsible in terms of understanding, what was required of me in show business. And I am a little more now. But the fact was, I believe that Dave tried, and I believe that Josh, I'm glad that he's on his way as a manager. It's just that for most of my life, I saw you guys as a necessary evil and as the enemy to some degree, and I grew distrustful, and all of us, I think, as young comics, anyone you talk to, the joke is like, my manager, like, I can't even. There's just the comedy of it, of like not being able to get your manager on the phone or not feeling represented or whatever. But I mean, you guys are busy. It's hard for us to realize, like, how is it not Marc Maron time all the time? Why don't you drop whatever you're doing? Because we have no idea what you're doing. But clearly you're doing relatively big things. So whatever the case was, it was just that, I just felt that Dave and I, like, he had gotten too big. I didn't really want to be with Josh, and I just needed to go. And it was like breaking up a 20-year marriage. And, I ended up with Olivia Wingate. I had started the podcast.
Who's a
already.
great manager as well.
She's great. And she had a small shop. She cares, like, it's an intimate situation. She's got a handful of clients at the time. She's attentive. She wants to help me shape my career for where I'm at now. And, and I needed somebody. And so I had the podcast going. And I didn't have any expectations of it, but I was broke and I was desperate. And she's not even she's not even a manager that knew about the club system. The comics that she worked with primarily were alternative comics. So now I'm coming in. I'm like, well, how are we gonna get comedy club? She's like, I don't know. So like, she's learning with me, how to sort of, deal with a guy that comes from where I come from. But she's been incredibly attentive, and the podcast was already going by the time I signed on with her, and that just defined me. So here's what I'm telling you. The stars finally lined up in the sense that a lot of times you guys can't do anything if something doesn't happen for the guy outside of you. That if some heat isn't generated, that you guys can sort of, work with, you don't generate heat, you guys. Like, it happens outside of you. Your job is to manage heat.
I feel that's one of my problems is that as a manager is I have generated heat, but there's sometimes when you can't generate heat, but people see, hey, well, you generated heat for that guy by doing this, 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 and this. How come you didn't generate the heat for me?
Yeah, well, whatever the case was, it was just something was happening, and she was there. And, through a certain, like, I still just go to my garage to talk to people. I don't fully really assess, what I'm, the scope of what I'm doing. But because of the podcast and because I made this choice to do this on my own outside of management, like I was, I was doing it on my own out of desperation, that this organic thing happened. I sort of like, through humility, by the time I started doing the podcast, I was like, I'm not going to be a relevant comic. I'm never going to do TV, but I've got to stay alive because I don't got nothing else. I don't do anything else.
How many podcasts were there in comedy when you started?
Well, I had never really listened to them, but I'd done a few years on radio, and like I knew that Carolla was doing one. I knew Kevin Smith did one. I knew Jimmy Dore did one. I knew Jimmy Pardo did one. But that was really, all I knew. There wasn't that many. There was probably a few people out there doing them. I mean, Todd Glass. But I knew it was this place where I could have this. I grew pretty good at the radio mic, and I liked it. It afforded me an intimacy, and it afforded me an honesty that I had like real control over. So I didn't know anything, but there was only a few.
And so when did you know that you were never going to do anything else again as a comedian, and when did you know you were never going to do anything else again as a podcast? In other words, when did you know you'd hit the mark and you'd made it and you'd gotten your audience and you're like, okay, I'm finally there in comedy and I'm finally there on the podcast?
Well, once we started to see the people coming in, and we started to get, like, when I interviewed Robin Williams, that was sort of a big deal. And, certain guests brought a certain amount of attention to it. But I think about a year in, the New York Times wrote a huge piece on me in the arts section in 2009. And, it was big, and it really covered everything and everything where I was coming from. And I knew that somehow or another, I was doing something relevant. And then as the numbers started to grow and the guests started to grow and people started to resonate with what I was doing, and it seemed to be helping people in ways I never thought it would help people. And, I was building a relationship with a fan base that was very deep because I was being very honest. So it wasn't just an entertainer relationship. It was like very candid and very emotional, and it started to grow. And all of a sudden, over a few years, I started to be able to sell tickets, but my relationship with my audience wasn't just, he's a comedian. They knew a lot about me. So it becomes a lot more, it's unique and it's deep and it's fairly interesting. And then when I got the show on IFC, based on my life through Jim Serpico and Dennis Leary's company, and that sort of took shape. All I know is that over time is that like I'm doing it exactly the way I want to do it, and I don't know any other way. And I don't think there was a way for me to do that before. Like I was not that calculating. I'm living the life I live, and I'm there's not much difference between me here and me on stage, and so my life became interesting because of the podcast and how I talk to people. And so I still don't know that what I'm doing is essentially stand-up comedy or professional entertainment. I'm just being myself finally. And it took, I don't think I arrived in my body until about a year into the podcast, where all of a sudden, whatever self-esteem I was lacking, I think all of us want to be relevant. Some people want to make money in show business and they'll do anything to do that. That was not my path. What I wanted was to give something that was important to people and important to me. I wanted to be relevant.
Well, you accomplished your goal there. I just want to ask you, like, do you feel you're a better stand-up comedian or a better podcaster?
Well, I think that what I do with people in the garage in terms of conversation is that I really want to connect with people, and usually I do, which is good. And the monologues are really sort of free form. But how it's informed my stand-up is that it's made me comfortable to be myself on stage, which I don't think I ever was. I think a lot of what stand-ups do for a good part of their career is master the ability to pretend like you're not scared or to pretend like you're uncomfortable. That's part of the job. So I think that what it's afforded me, as I think I'm doing the best comedy I've ever done in my life, primarily because I'm very much myself. Up there in the way, obviously there's a difference between sitting here and being on a stand-up stage. That all those years of being angry and being sad or performing for 9 people, or doing the Taunton Regency, is that there's a part of me that lives up there on that stage and is now, has always lived up there, but is now really comfortable up there. And so when I take a comedy stage, a lot of times I'll go out on a theater stage before the people come in just to remember that I live up here. This is my room. So like that thing is very much in place. So going up on a comedy stage, I have no fear, and I have complete trust in my ability. I never think about bombing. I don't think about, if I'm going to get through the time necessarily. I do a little bit, but I that's just a habit. Like I'm like, for some reason, if I don't do a show for a week, I'm like, do I even know how to do this? But there's a part of me that lives up there, and there's a part of me that really knows how to be a stand-up comedian. And the podcasting was this other thing where it's like, I never thought I had those kind of skills, but they're sort of intertwined. I think that I'm very good at talking to people.
If you had all the money in the world and the health of yourself and your family, but you had to go to work every week for 40 hours a week, what would you be doing?
I think I would probably be some sort of, teacher at a small college.
What would your subject matter be?
Marc Maron.
1,
2,
3,
4, 5, 6.
6 degrees of separation.
Say a sentence, the first sentence that comes to your mind. Anything. Louis C.K.
Genius and friend.
Richard Pryor.
The best.
Johnny Carson.
Smoothest of the ever.
The Ding Ho, Inman Square, Cambridge.
One time, I was at the Ding Ho before it closed, and I'd spilled a drink on myself before I went on stage. And I was so nervous that everyone was going to think I peed that I had to spend like 5 minutes explaining that it wasn't pee.
San Francisco comedy scene versus Boston.
Boston made me who I was as a comic, and San Francisco made me who I was as a creative person.
New York comedy scene versus Los Angeles.
Yeah. New York is New York is, it's like where you train. LA, I don't know what's going on out here.
Name 3 comedians who people might not know who you respect when you see what they do on stage.
Nate Bargatze, Al Madrigal, Maria Bamford.
Cool. Your proudest moment professionally.
Well, as a comic, it was probably that first Letterman. And then ultimately, after years of waiting, doing panel on Letterman last year, that was a big deal to me. As a podcaster, I think that, that New York Times article and the Mel Brooks interview.
Cool. Your biggest disappointment professionally.
My biggest disappointment professionally was just, not signing with you. Because I would have loved to have fired you. No, I imagine because I seem somewhat obsessed about it that not getting SNL after meeting with Lorne Michaels, it had an impact on me. But I like as I get older and as I sort of land in what I'm doing, I'm not as resentful of other people, and I'm not, like something like because I have some pride in myself genuinely now. It's hard for me to think about things in that way. But I think for a long time, like thinking that I somehow blew that opportunity to get on SNL. It had a profound impact on me.
Why? How did you blow the opportunity?
I just don't think I was ready to do all the things that I was screaming at my manager to get me to do. Like I just felt like because there was this weird time with Lorne Michaels where, not unlike Kennison, Lorne was like, looking in my eyes, and he says, you can tell a lot by someone's eyes. And there's part of me that thinks like, why can't my eyes give Lorne what he needs right now? So I took it upon myself. I've never got to talk to him about that meeting, but I've talked to everybody who I talked to who's done SNL about that meeting. And I've gotten a lot of information over the years, some from Jim Breuer recently that really shed a different light on it. But I somehow blame myself for that failure. And not unlike, a manager, it might not have anything to do with me, really. It might have just been politics.
Might have been. Now you're an executive producer of your own show, which is really incredible, and you should be very proud of that. It's amazing. So what advice do you have for the young comic who's like floundering, not knowing what he's doing, working at the Coffee Connection, or somebody in any line of work in the entertainment field or that relates to anything, who's just starting, doesn't know where they're going, how they're getting there, what they're going to do, the path they should take to get to the place where you're at right now, not only as a stand-up comedian, a podcaster, a talk show panelist, a guy who literally produces his own television show and is on camera on his own television show. Normally the dream of every artist in the world. And one of the things I think about you when I sit across from you that's so difficult for me is that when I look at you, I'm thinking of the graph of happiness and the downtime of just sheer loneliness and wondering how it is ever going to turn around. And I know that you would tell me that, you have money now, you have a comfort zone, but I know that it hasn't changed you as a person. And so I think that a lot of people who are out there trying to get to the next level in any profession are thinking, God, if I could just get there, I'll have money and I'll have everything I want. But people don't understand that it's not the money that necessarily makes you happy. It gives you that comfort zone. And I want to let our audience know from your perspective what it takes from that humble beginnings to get to where you are, and what advice you'd have about that.
Well, ultimately, it can only be retrospective for me, because like I didn't have a plan other than to be a comic, and I didn't understand show business, as I've told you before, and people do sort of understand those things. That, you know, the one thing I've learned, and if young comics ask me, is that you know, and I don't know if it happens as much as it used to, but all I wanted to be was a comic. Like I turned down the opportunity to be in Dave Cross's sketch group, which went on to become Mr. Show.
Cross comedy.
Yeah. You know, I did the first two and Catch a Rising Star in Boston. Like all I wanted to be was a comic. All I wanted to do was get on stage and be a great comedian. And I didn't know how great comedians made it. I didn't know anything about selling tickets. I didn't know anything about schmoozing or anything. It was very pure for me. I just wanted to be a comic. So like now I realize, like, a lot of the guys I started with who were less delusional than me, you know, to be a comic and to be, you know, one of the 10 comics that, you know, that sells tickets in the country at any given point in the history of things, or if you're lucky enough to sell tickets, you know, a lot of times it doesn't last that long or whatever. But a lot of the guys that knew they were funny and talented as joke writers and as comedians were like, well, I can be a writer, or I can, you know, go into show running, or I can, you know, there are other paths like that I never thought of. So like if a comic asked me, I said, well, if you have a talent, if you are a talented person, the biggest challenge is, you know, what do you do with that talent? How do you not let it destroy you? Because talent can be like cancer. Like, you know, if you're talented, you know, a lot of times if you don't harness it, it'll destroy you from the inside, because it'll create entitlement. It'll create, you know, a lot of the things that you don't realize it's doing. A lot of talented people have just, you know, either fallen into themselves or destroyed themselves. But ultimately what happened for me was that, you know, I was never very calculating in terms of what I wanted from show business. And ultimately we are in show business. And I wish I had more, you know, something better to tell you, other than by the time I made it in show business, I had really given up on a lot of my dreams. And I took a shot at a new medium only to keep doing something. And you know, my timing was just right. But the fortunate thing about the timing was, you know, once I got the opportunity, like, I had let go of that shit. I was like, it's not going to happen for me. But the weird thing is that when it did happen, I was definitely ready for everything to happen to me that has happened. And, you know, however you need to be ready for that, you know, in your heart and mind, you know, that's going to be when it happens. Because if you're not ready, something's going to go wrong. I mean, I've seen a lot of guys, and you know this, and I've talked to them. I've seen guys get opportunities and they don't go anywhere. Like, you know, and it takes an amazing, persevering person to do what Bill Burr did, or what Kevin Hart did, to sort of be the guy and then have it go away, and then go back to the drawing board and get back up on stage and, you know, and rebuild and believe in yourself. So whatever it takes for you to believe in yourself in a general way, not a bullshit way, you know, do that.
Well, Marc Maron, this has been amazing for me, and I hope it's been okay for you.
Yeah, it was good.
This has been a day that I will never forget as long as I live, and I mean that sincerely. I really had a great time. Our audience is going to be blown away by this, and I'm so grateful that you came here, and thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks for having me, Barry, and thanks for giving me my first comedy gigs.
All right.
Sorry I didn't sign with you, but it worked out best for both of us.
Normally here I say to somebody, this is your first podcast, right? And they say yes, and now I'm looking at you saying, yeah, this is my 797 podcast, right? Right.
I like to talk.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And as always, everybody, this is me, Barry Katz. This is Industry Standard. And if you like the show, please tell all your friends. And if you don't like the show, tell all your friends.